This is the upgrading your water heater for efficiency, savings, and pollution reduction. Our speakers for tonight will be Neil Bozegard of the Environmental Center and Megan Cummings and Robert Harmley of Greensavers. Um, and I will just pass it on to Neil.
Awesome. Thanks, Rowan. So hi, everybody. My name's Neil Bonsgard. I use he, him pronouns, and I work at the Environmental Center here in Bend. And we are, I'm excited to be here tonight. If you know me, you know that there's few things that get me more excited than heat pump water heaters. And that sounds like a joke, but it's actually true. So I think there's a couple of reasons why. So I'm going to tee it off and hand it off to Greensavers. But heat pump water heaters are a really great climate solution. And because the technology has gotten a lot better, we've had a lot more manufacturers enter into the space. They're really starting to take off. And in places that they're not, it's often not because of large structural barriers or cost or technology. It's really just because we haven't seen. It's just a newer thing. So I've installed heat pump water heaters at my. I've installed multiple of them in town, and they work great. And it's one of those game changer things where they can really significantly change a quiet side of your energy consumption as a household. Most people don't think about their water heater, but a heat pump water heater is whether you're switching from electric or whether you're making the switch from gas, is a pretty big shift to a significant amount of energy that you're using. And there's a couple of differences in how and where they fit, and it doesn't work in every situation, but we'll let Robert kind of dive into some of those details a little bit later. But this is a really exciting technology. I'm excited that you all are here spending your evening with us talking about water heaters. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Robert Hammerly from Greensavers.
Thank you so much, Neil. It's great to be here, and I'm enthusiastic that Environmental Center and Electrify Bend are bringing, collaborating on resources and getting the word out, because I do believe, like you, Neil, maybe it's a sign that I'm a little bit geeky, but I like heat pumps as well. And I think heat pump water heaters specifically play a important part of the overall heat pump game. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So thank you to everybody who helped make this possible. Next slide, please. So who is Greensavers? We are a home performance contractor. We've been here in town for going on 17 years now. And we basically take a holistic approach to doing upgrades to your home, to electrifying buildings of all kinds, but specifically homes. And heat pumps are an important part of that electrification package. So we want to electrify your main heating system, your space heating system with a great heat pump. We want to electrify your water heating system with this heat pump water heater technology we're going to get deeper into. And then, of course, we want to bring renewable energy to help produce those electrons that your house will now run on. Meanwhile, we're insulating and doing weatherization and reducing the load of your home, so these new technologies can work that much better and reduce your carbon footprint that much more. Next slide, please. So introduction, that's me in the middle. Robert, I helped found Greensavers 17 years ago. We're still going strong. Megan, who is really going to get into the meat and potatoes of heat pump water heaters, is our senior home performance consultant, and she is out in the community talking about heat pump water heaters every day, and talking about the technology, talking about the installation do's and don'ts, talking about the little goodies like tax credits and incentives that help move these projects forward. So I'll be listening closely to what Megan has to say. Next slide, please. So heat pump water heaters. I guess, a good place to start is, what is a heat pump and why are they so cool? So heat pumps transfer heat. They literally, using a compressor or a pump, move heat from one location to another. And that's what makes them so efficient, opposed to a electric resistance or a traditional gas water heater that generates the heat itself by either burning things or by running a lot of current through a wire. A heat pump is just moving the heat from one space to another. And the technology these days, especially with inverter-driven heat pumps and just some of the more modern heat pumps, they can take heat even when it's really cold outside. They can still produce a lot of heat. And so that's why we get so excited about them. Because they're so efficient, they are less costly to operate compared to a standard electric resistance water heater. They might be a third or half the cost to operate. And thus they really reduce your carbon footprint as well, because they're just using so much less electrons to do the job that they do. Megan, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I want to flesh out a few parts of it, and that Rob nailed it with, these things are really just moving heat energy that already exists as opposed to burning a fuel. And both Neil and Robert hit on these units, heat pumps in general, having come a long way. But as the bona fide heat pump nerd I am, I always find it somewhat interesting and more approachable to state that we've been interacting with heat pumps for literally hundreds of years. Heat pump technology has been around since the advent of refrigerators, which really uses that same process to move heat from an insulated box. It's that we are now getting better and smarter at using these things and applying them in different ways, including to heat domestic water. And for most homeowners, I think Neil made a good point that it's somewhat of a silent, something they don't really think about perhaps. But domestic water heating, regardless of who you are, what kind of home you live in, what sort of lifestyle you have, is by a significant margin a home's second biggest energy sink after space heating. So it really is no small drop in the bucket for electrifying a home and upgrading its efficiency while reducing its carbon footprint. So I hope a little bit later here can touch upon more of the value, but also approachable ways to make that more tangible for most homeowners. I think we can move on to the next slide if we're ready. So yeah, some of the advantages of a heat pump water heater, some of this is repeating some of these things we've hit upon. They are more energy efficient and they are electric, increasing that reliance on a home's fossil fuels, especially dovetailing really well with a photovoltaic solar system. I see a lot of power in that, where if a home can be producing the power, the electricity with a photovoltaic system and using that energy that it's producing to actually power the home, I mean, that's big steps towards a net zero conversation and an energy independent home, whatever that independence may mean to a home. So they do they're efficient, they do decrease that reliance on fossil fuels, and with that efficiency and decreased dependence on fossil fuels, they come at a lower operating cost. And a big question I get in the field is, how much lower? Some of that will depend on where it's installed and, of course, the lifestyle and use thing. But a good rule of thumb is that they are about 3.5 times more efficient than an electric resistance water heater. Savings from an electric resistance to a heat pump water heater is around $350 per year. They additionally have some benefits over a lot of other water heaters in functionality. They have the ability to be put into high demand mode if there is an occasion, perhaps guests, holiday season, and a little bit more output is needed without sacrificing a huge amount of that efficiency. They also have vacation mode, which can lower its energy needs when you're out of town for multiple periods. That is something I see in the field that's very popular with folks who travel a lot, or also in Central Oregon, where there are a fair amount of folks who vacation here and folks who are managing vacation homes' energy needs by taking advantage of that vacation mode. For example, if guests won't be at that home for up to a week, the homeowner has the ability remotely as well to put that water heater in that vacation mode, increasing those savings, adding that value. I will say they integrate with other electrification measures. A lot of homeowners sort of start their electrification journey with a heat pump water heater. Some of that I think can be the lower cost to get in the game compared to electrifying space heating. And oftentimes a water heater doesn't come with the conversation of a panel upgrade, which sometimes is a part of electrifying a space heating home. So yeah, there are a lot of advantages to selecting a heat pump water heater over an electric resistance model or a traditional gas unit. There are, however, not all great things. There are some things that are worth considering when installing a heat pump water heater, when choosing. I often joke that an electric resistance unit is silent but deadly. Those units do not make noise, and heat pump water heaters do. This is one of the benefits of this technology advancing, in that they are getting quieter and quieter. But the current models that we most commonly install are rated at about 45 decibels. Putting some of that in perspective, 45 decibels is comparable to a light rainfall. So where that unit is going to be installed, we do want to consider if that will be a disruption. They do have that ability to move in between modes. So for some homeowners, they find that using the electric function of a heat pump water heater can be a way to take advantage of savings in heat pump mode when they're comfortable making that noise. But if there's a situation where it's installed in the interior and maybe at night, you can modulate that to go to electric mode to reduce that noise, eliminate that noise. These units do have a larger footprint, particularly if they need to have air intake or air exhaust considerations. Fleshing that out, a heat pump water heater is an air source heat pump, meaning that it needs to breathe air to get the heat sourced from that air. And it extracts the heat from that air to heat the water in the tank. It will then exhaust out cooler air. And so for some install scenarios, we do need to, one, make sure it's got enough air intake to breathe, and two, that we're not turning any interior location into a meat locker. And particularly in ducted installs, there is a little bit of a larger footprint. With the technology advancing, some manufacturers have gotten quite creative with where these ducts are located, which can help to massage the space needed. They also can't move heat down to, they can only move heat down to a certain temperature, which, especially if there's an electric vehicle in a garage, is, I think, worth considering and how that can play into it. These units do operate as a heat pump down to 37 degrees Fahrenheit. At 37 and below, it's not that you cannot heat domestic water, it's that it will take a little bit more energy to do so. And again, emphasizing that there are ways we can get around that. You can duct exhaust to the exterior in that example of if it's in a garage and there is an EV battery to be concerned with. We might want to consider ducting that out so we don't have a sort of closed loop situation by cooling down an area that we don't want further cooled. I will also say there is condensate produced with these units, which is a consideration. We do often need to figure out how we can manage that condensate, whether using a drain or what's called a condensate pump, to ensure that we don't have condensate issues.
Megan, I think that's an important part, that the heat pump water heater will not work as a heat pump below 37 degrees. If the air it's using to glean heat from is below 37, but if the heat pump is in your home and maybe, say it's in a mechanical room, but it's exhaust ducted outside, it would, no matter how cold it is outside, it would still be running in a heat pump mode, because the air inside your house obviously isn't below 37 degrees. So I think Megan made a couple good points, but just to stress, there are configurations on how you duct these units where you could run it as a heat pump all winter long. But it is something that needs to be planned and thought through.
Great point. And I think it's also worth considering that in most install scenarios, most of the time it will be operating as a heat pump. Even in an unconditioned garage in Central Oregon, we pretty rarely see a temp drop below or significantly below that 37. So giving you folks some real world examples of these units, we had a gentleman named Brad, who made the switch from a standard gas water heater to a heat pump water heater, which is estimated to use 70% less energy than that standard gas water heater. Which, clarifying what we mean by a standard gas water heater, those are also referred to as atmospheric vented. So if you have one of those gas water heaters with what looks like a little tin hat on top of it, that's what we're referring to as a standard gas water heater. Really, there are significant savings, touched upon this a bit, but in this fuel switch example and most fuel switch examples, a consumer in Central Oregon will save about $15 a month, or between $100 and $300, even as much as $350 a year. And when you do consider that there are pretty juicy tax credits and oftentimes generally favorable utility rebates, installing one of these units is sometimes the same, if not more cost effective, a lower investment ticket than opting for a standard electric resistance or standard gas water heater. I think it's prudent here to talk about in fuel switching, there is the consideration of electrical. If a consumer will be making the choice to move from gas to electric, there is the consideration of needing to run a high voltage circuit. That does add a little bit to the cost and also increases the tax credit amount, which is encouraging. And a part of Greensavers service offerings, we do help homeowners to navigate the full upgrade and install, including that electrical. But a consumer fuel switching should always be aware that in going from gas to electrical does need to be ran. Another example here, this client upgraded a 40-year-old electric resistance water heater to a heat pump water heater. This switch has very favorable savings. That's where you start getting above $350 a year. And as bullet point number 2 mentions, this is a very easy switch for homeowners to make, as you do not need to run that high voltage. Electric resistance water heaters and heat pump water heaters generally are going to use the same circuit size, and it's very easy to plug and play in that scenario. Tax credits and rebates. big thing that I think is on a lot of homeowners' minds, as it should be. There are federal tax credits currently available. Those are federal, and they cover 30% of the total install cost, including that electrical, up to $2,000. I would say in Central Oregon, the average consumer is seeing around $1,500 of that in federal tax credits. Would encourage you, of course, to always talk to a tax professional, but do like to point out that a tax credit in many ways is more meaningful than a deduction. In Central Oregon, we do have a number of utility providers. We have Central Electric Cooperative. They offer a $1,000 off the install cost. That is an instant off the top of the project rebate. Midstate Electric will offer you $800 on non-ducted installs and $900 off fully ducted installs, helping to further offset that cost when there is a little bit more consideration for a ducted install. And Energy Trust of Oregon, which is the category you would fall in if you're using Pacific Power, Pacific Corp, or you have Cascade Natural Gas, Avista Natural Gas, and really natural gas in Oregon Territory. They provide their incentives, what they call upstream, giving that essentially to distributors and contractors. So it's sort of buried in that price. But regardless of what utility you have, what fuel source you might be using or switching from, there are very favorable incentives on these. And that's a conversation that if folks are interested in more further exploring exactly what territory they're in, how those utility incentives and tax credits impact their install cost, Greensavers is here to help. And that is a part of our service suite, is helping homeowners to navigate the pathway to maximize their credits and incentives.
All right, was there anything else you wanted to hit before we jumped over to Q&A, Megan?
No, thank you, Neil, and thanks for Environmental Center and Electrify Bend for putting this on and bringing us all together. Pump up the heat.
All right, wonderful. So I'll take it from here. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Robert. I neglected to mention at the beginning of this webinar that we strongly urge all audience members who are interested to type in the webinar chat any questions you have for our lovely presenters, and then we'll have Greensavers respond accordingly. So I might as well kick that off now. So now is the waiting game. Ooh, okay. So we have one. Can you run a recirculation pump with a heat pump water heater?
That is a great question. And yes, you can. Certain manufacturers will need to have the heat pump unit operate in what's called hybrid mode, where it does modulate between heat pump and electric resistance. You really don't take much of a hit on efficiency per se. It's frankly sort of the communication needed between that recirculation pump and a heat pump water heater. So yes, absolutely. It just may, with most manufacturers, require that unit to stay in hybrid mode.
And I would say this, to add to that, that there are some recirculation, all recirculation pumps are not created equal, and some are more energy efficient than others. And the Greensavers would recommend using, there's a couple different modes, but the idea that you could program your recirculation pump so it's just not running all the time. Another one that we're a fan of is a push button model, so that you can, say you're in a master bathroom, you can push a button and it activate the recirculation pump. So just trying to steer clear of the pumps that circulate 24/7 and focus on ones that there's motion activated ones, there's push button, there's programmable, there's a whole bunch of different pumps. But definitely the ones that are running less are going to be one, work better with your heat pump water heater, and two, just save you more energy in general.
Yeah, I'll second that, Robert. The water recirculation pumps are great. Oh, and somebody just put it in the chat. How perfect. Water recirculation pumps work to keep a certain amount of hot water flowing through your pipes. So then it takes less time to get hot water at a tap if it's further away, or a shower or sink or whatever, if it's further away from the water heater. They can be a really great tool to reduce water use, because you don't have to run the water as long if you have a really long plumbing run to your kitchen, for example, from the garage. But it does mean that you have water that's losing heat outside of the very insulated box that is your water heater. And so trying to take advantage of balancing those is, Robert mentioned my favorite version of that, which is the push button ones, where you can say, hey, I'm getting into the bathroom, I'm going to take a shower, I can push a button and then it can recirculate then, instead of it happening all the time. And that's a little bit easier for the computers of the heat pump water heaters to understand too, when there's one plug of water coming through rather than all the time. Looks like we're getting a lot of good questions. Rowan, do you want to pick another one?
I did see a client mention the 120 volt water heaters. Traditionally, most heat pump water heaters are going to need a 30 amp 240. That was that higher voltage electricity we mentioned. The 120 volt units are oftentimes not the best choice. First and foremost, they are very expensive, the unit itself, much more than the 30 amp water heater. That is something of a result of it being, I guess, a one-off from the factory, but you will find the retail cost of 120 volt is almost more than the cost to actually run the 30 amp. I have also probed several manufacturers on if in a place like Central Oregon, where we have very cold supply water coming in, if that 120 volt option is climate appropriate, and frankly have not received an answer that leads me confident to offer those in our climate, for the fact that our supply water in Central Oregon comes in at about 45 degrees on average.
Awesome. We have another person asking, if I install two heat water pump or pump water heaters in my home, one for my main house and one in my attached ADU, will I only be eligible for one incentive, or federal incentive? My apologies.
Thanks for asking that, Hope, and nice to see you here. Yes, you will only be eligible for the federal tax credit incentive on the main home. And I will say that these federal tax credits do apply to an individual's primary residence only.
We have another person asking, can gas oven/stoves be tied into entire systems?
I'm not sure if that's talking about like one project, that like a larger electrification project.
If we were out at your house doing a heat pump water heater, we would be happy to run another high amperage circuit for your electric stove. So if that's the question, yes, we'd be happy to help do both, electrify both appliances.
You have another person asking, can you explain what upstream incentives mean? Lost the thing. Here we go. Let's see. Oh, here. My apologies. One moment. Go. Okay. Upstream incentives mean with respect to Pacific Power?
Yeah, it's sort of the way that Pacific Power Energy Trust have selected to offer their incentive. So they do provide the $700 upstream or essentially to the distributor of these water heaters, the contractors providing that water heater purchased from the distributor.
So that means that the price that you see for the unit cost that Greensavers has or kind of gets passed through in the system is going to be $700 less. So that incentive does exist, was applied. It just doesn't show up as a separate line item because it's much more efficient. And well, there's a number of reasons why they did it. One reason was just so then the distributors would be willing to stock the higher ticket item, and because they're more expensive. But also it just streamlines it. So there's one less piece of paperwork that a person would have to fill out or a contractor would have to fill out. So it's definitely a positive move.
All right, we have another question from Suzanne. So how much is the range of costs for install or for installations?
There is quite a range, as it will depend on if high voltage is needed, condensate management needs, and the ducting space considerations. I think a pretty solid estimate would be, before any incentives and tax credits, between about $3,000 and $6,500. And some of that range is also going to depend on the size of the unit in terms of capacity that a homeowner, a home might need. And these units do come in 50-gallon, 66-gallon, and 80-gallon units. So I know that's quite a range. That's where I would really encourage you to speak to Greensavers, get that free estimate on exactly where you fall in that and which unit is going to be most appropriate for you to narrow that down a bit. And that again is prior to incentives and tax credits.
And then I'm not sure if this was answered quite yet. I'm trying to follow up through the chat and seeing who responded to who and what has been repeating in a question, but I believe this is a new one. What is the purpose of a recirculation pump?
Essentially, it's to get hot water to a fixture quicker. No one likes to see gallons of water down the drain as they're waiting for that hot water to get to their sink, their master shower. So broadly, the purpose of a recirculation pump is to circulate the water through the system. So when that fixture is turned on, the hot water is there and ready. There is some energy associated with that process as well.
All right, thank you. What is the average lifespan of a gas water heater?
Water heaters in general live a lot longer, storage tank water heaters, a tanked unit in Central Oregon than they do in a lot of regions of our country due to the mineral content of our waters. It's very gentle on those storage tanks, so we do have a lot less instances of corrosion than other areas. But generally, I'd say a water heater lasts about 10 to 20 years in Central Oregon. 20 years is definitely on that higher end. And it is one of those where it is better to be proactive. I have seen consumers who have the best of intentions to get a heat pump water heater to make that fuel switch and that upgrade. But if there is a failure scenario, it sometimes is a little bit easier and a lot quicker to get a standard gas water heater installed next day, as opposed to another question I see here with how long is the install from agreement, initial payment to function. At Greensavers, we're typically about 1 to 3 weeks out on one of these installs, and it does take 1 day. You'll be without water to your home for maybe an hour, and you'll be without hot water for most of that day. By end of that day, you will, however, be able to shower, do your wash.
All right, and we talked a little bit about more of the local incentives, but what are the state incentives?
Currently, the state of Oregon does not provide any tax credit incentives on these products.
Can I throw in a thought on the last question, and Megan's note about doing this proactively? I kind of say it a little tongue in cheek, but I feel like there's some sort of magic that makes it so then water heaters tend to fail on Christmas Eve when your mother-in-law is taking a shower and you have, your house is full of people. But really, things typically don't fail when it's really convenient. And so what a lot of folks are doing is recognizing the age, and kind of that they're on the tail end of their water heater, or maybe there might actually be a little bit more of an extended, well, basically identify that this is something that you're going to work on. Call and make a plan, talk to Greensavers, jump into that retrofit proactively, and or the further along you get in the process and the more that this is going to work and I have all these things figured out, I don't have any questions, I've saved, I know how much it's going to cost, it's going to make it a lot easier than when your water heater starts leaking, or you get that dreaded cold shower again when your mother-in-law is taking a shower on Christmas Eve. And that's definitely something that is a barrier when we look at trying to get more heat pump water heaters out there, is it's not something that folks are looking at proactively. But if you're on a webinar on a Monday night talking about water heaters, you probably can be proactive about it and excited that this might be a step towards electrification. And then there's a couple of comments in there about the 120 volt circuits. I know I'll add a couple additional pieces. I know that there are some manufacturers that have put climate ratings on their 120 volt units. But I think the comment that's in here on the 120 volt unit essentially is stuck in heat pump mode, because it's going to be able to run heat pump mode. But with most of the ones that we've been talking about right now, they sometimes use the term hybrid for them, which means that they both have a heat pump, which is that really efficient unit. But if the ambient air temperature drops below that, or if you have a high demand and you want a quicker recharge rate, so you want it to heat up faster, they still have the same electric resistance coils that a standard electric resistance tank would have. And so that's the piece that's missing when you have the 120 volt model. So those were created particularly to try to address fuel switching when folks have gas or have limited panel capacity. But you are giving up that insurance of the 240 backup, which is going to be super specific. So I can say I have an energy monitor on my water heater. It's in a more conditioned, it's like a semi-conditioned converted garage, and it has been able to operate for a year without switching out of heat pump mode. But but then another install that's in a detached unconditioned garage is able to do that like 99% of the time, but that other 1% of the time it does use that electric resistance that you wouldn't have if it was on if it was the 120 volt version.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Neil. I'm going to give the chat maybe a minute or two more until just to see if any more questions come in, and then we can transition into our closing statements.
I did see a question come in on saving is essentially, can we get our gas oven and cooktop included in the process of changing a water heater? And the answer is absolutely, especially with Greensavers. And I do want to say there that that is a very cost-effective way to do it. Electrifying multiple measures is a good way to avoid paying premium costs on the electrical portions needed there. And it is very common for a homeowner to say electrify their water heater and have the electrician, while he's out there, get that circuit ready to go for your cooktop, or even for your EV or your HVAC system. So absolutely, and it can ultimately be a financially wise move to electrify multiple appliances in one go.
Alrighty, and if I don't see any other questions, hopefully I didn't miss any. Seems like everyone got covered. I'm going to transition into our closing statements. So thank you first and foremost, thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day to attend this wonderful webinar and to share this time with our Greensavers and Neil. I would like to let everyone know that we hope you buy a heat pump water heater whenever is convenient and you decide that it's a good time for you. We urge you to call / contact Greensavers because they have endless amounts of information. Either you are welcome to contact Megan or Robert through their emails, or go on to the Greensavers website for more information, or give them a quick call. For folks who are interested in doing a do-it-yourself installation, Energize Bend, which is the kind of group that's kind of putting this together, wants to support you. So I urge you to either contact me or Neil at our emails, and we'd be happy to give you more information as our project presentation continues forwards in the works. And we definitely encourage you to get connected with Energize Bend if you're interested in learning more about home and vehicle electrification and helping spread the word about the great high efficiency equipment that is available today. And please sign up for our mailing list on our website. Link is join the movement if you are interested in more information. We hope that everyone has a good rest of your night. And again, thank you so much.